Welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast for all Australian Apple computer enthusiasts and collectors.
Welcome back to the Macdownunder Podcast. This is episode 48. I'm Justin, and thanks for joining me again for today's episode. Now, I got down to the Mac Museum last weekend for the open day, and it was fantastic. Even though it was a bit chilly outside and a bit blowy, there were lots of old faces and plenty of new faces that came through the door, having a look through the museum at all the exhibits, asking questions. It was a great day. And the membership scheme that Matt's got going down there seems to be gaining a lot of interest, particularly about borrowing some of the equipment that you may not already have in your collection at home. So we'll talk more about the next open day in a moment. Now, last episode, we covered my third ever Apple computer, which was the Apple IIgs that I purchased in 1988. So rather than move on to the Macs, I thought today, as I hinted a bit last week, that we'd talk about all of the official Apple II models that were available around the world. And we'll talk about those that were easily attained in Australia and perhaps those that weren't. We'll also cover the regular collecting news, coming events, and for sale items. And there's a couple of interesting ones. So, on to today's episode. So we've spoken previously about the Apple II, and here's the original Apple II that was released in 1977. Well, that's not that one, but it's an example of an original Apple II. Now, like the Apple I, the Apple II originally shipped as a motherboard only. No case, no power supply, no keyboard. And the idea was it was an upgrade or an exchange for those that had the original Apple I and already had all the other bits and pieces that they needed. So that came out in May 1977. It came with the same 6502 1 megahertz processor that the Apple I used, and originally supplied with 4 kilobytes, that's 4 kilobytes of RAM. Tiny amount of RAM, but built for expansion. Woz knew what he was doing, and he made it capable of expanding to 48K on the motherboard, and if you add in an extra 16K RAM card, you could get it to 64K. It came with an onboard cassette interface, an audio interface for data. It came with 8 expansion slots, a special 0, but the other 7. It came with NTSC standard color, composite color out, which originally the Apple I did not have, and a monitor ROM to control the machine. And then there was Steve Wozniak's magic integer basic, also in ROM. You had to type that in or input it on a cassette for the Apple I, but in the Apple II, it was in the ROM. And the original Apple IIs also came with game paddles. Now, that was the motherboard version. Fast forward a month, and on the 10th of June 1977, Apple started to ship a complete Apple II, as we would know it now, coming with the case, a built-in keyboard, and a built-in power supply. And what a great machine they were. Then there were upgrades to be made to the monitor ROM, and also there was an improved BASIC called AppleSoft BASIC, co-authored with Microsoft, I believe. So in June 1979, 2 years later, the Apple II Plus was released. Now the Apple II Plus is identical to the Apple II, except it has the AppleSoft ROM, which has floating point mathematics, and the Auto Start ROM. That meant that if you plugged in your disk drive, it would boot automatically from the disk drive, or later on from a hard drive like the Profile, etc. So that's the Apple II Plus that came out in 1979. We've talked about the disk drives and all those other things in previous episodes. I'll put a link down in the description. So the Apple II and the Apple II Plus were both in production at the same time, so you could choose which one you wanted. And in fact, there was a language card that you could put in either that would allow you to load integer basic into your Apple II Plus, and there was a firmware ROM card that you can put in either and flick the switch to basically turn your Apple II into a II Plus or if you had it in the 2 Plus, to turn it into an Apple II with the appropriate ROMs. Now, the Apple II and the Apple II Plus lasted right through until December 1982. Now, during that period, there were a heap of variations, and I'm not going to talk about all of them because, no one has enough time, and there's other podcasts for that anyway. But it appears in terms of the motherboards, there were 15 revisions documented in various in text. Now, some of those, I'm led to believe, were never actually released. Nevertheless, there were plans and it's documented in the Apple service notes. So 15 motherboard variations between 1977 and 1982. Cases. There were at least 2 styles of cases. The original case was ventless, so these notches cut in the side to provide air circulation didn't exist in the first version. If you remember, Steve Jobs didn't like fans and he liked aesthetics, and having cuts in the side he probably wasn't a huge fan of. But those ventless cases were also hand cast. So there's all sorts of stories in the documentation and the literature that say that the early employees had to sand the cases smooth because they had bubbles and things in them, and then spray paint them for the finish. But then eventually they moved to the ABS injected mouldings, which these ones are. And I don't know that there was another revision until the 2E. So I'm aware of 2 cases. If you know about others, pop it down in the comments because it's really hard to find online. In fact, most of this information is tricky to find online. Now, keyboards, there were at least 4 variations of keyboard, and you can see a couple of them here. So the original keyboards were made by Datanetics, and this one's a Datanetics keyboard, and you can tell because the power light right down in the front corner is raised, and so that's clearly a Datanetics keyboard. There was a second version of the Datanetics keyboard, and depending which documentation you read, some people will suggest that that was Apple's version that they built themselves based on the Datanetics design. I'm not sure that that's true. A lot of literature says that it was actually made by Datanetics. And it possibly was radio frequency industry compliant. So it had the appropriate shielding, apparently. The third version appears to have been made by the keyboard company. Now, if you remember, the keyboard company made the original Apple joysticks and the original Apple paddles, and Steve Jobs liked them so much, he bought the company. So the keyboard company was really Apple, and it used the Alps key switches and a number of others. And pretty clear, there was the flat power light button that was, at least from that version onward. And allegedly, there's upper lowercase capabilities in these machines. You needed to swap the EEPROM over, but it was designed so you could do that swap if you chose to. They didn't come with lowercase though. And also at this point, you could get low profile or the sculptured keycaps, a bit more texture, a bit more curve to them. All right. The fourth version of the keyboard, also made by the keyboard company, or really Apple, was known as the bucket keyboard. And that was the 2 Plus version that gets in this one, which has got an encoder. And instead of the encoder being attached to the keyboard PCB, which this one is and this one is, the encoder was attached via, or hanging basically under the keyboard PCB via a series of pins. And certainly this Plus, my Euro Plus and the J Plus, which we'll talk about in a minute, all have that. All right. Power supplies. Well, it appears that there were 4, or at least 4 versions of the power supply as well. So the first power supply was built by Apple. And to physically distinguish the first one, basically it's silver coloured and it has a little toggle switch rather than the big flat switch that we're used to. So that was the very first series of power supplies. The second series is also silver in colour, and in fact this Apple II has one of those in it. And it's got the UL recognition on the back, which it does. The third version is what a lot of people will be familiar with. It was the gold-coloured Aztec power supply, which had an on-off switch and also a switch to go from 110 or 115 to 230 volts, which was covered by a black cover. And in fact, this Apple II Plus has got exactly that on the back. I'll show you a photo. And then the final power supply was also gold in colour, made by Aztec. And instead of the switch available on the back, you actually had to change jumpers inside the power supply to change voltage from 115 or 230. So we had the Apple II and we had the Apple II Plus. Neither of those were available in 240 volts originally, and neither of them were capable of the PAL colour encoding that we're used to here in Australia and also used in Europe. So ITT, which was British ITT Consumer Products, decided to talk to Apple, and they got a license to make their own Apple II, so an Apple II clone, but under license. So Apple agreed to it, and you can see that on the machine. So it was the first Apple II clone, licensed one. And now it was eventually released in 1979. And I think when you find out about what they had to do, it may well have started production a lot earlier than that, but didn't actually get released till 1979. So it needed a power supply that was adjusted for 220 volts for the UK and Europe, and 50 hertz instead of 60 hertz. So it was quite a change in the power supply. They had to redevelop the motherboard in two major ways. They needed to adjust it to be capable of the more sophisticated PAL color standard used in Europe. And so they had to put in a 9th bit instead of 7 bits that was used for NTSC. They needed to put in an 8th and 9th bit to enable PAL color. So they went from 192 lines with 280 dots in the NTSC to 192 and 360 dots across in the PAL color in high res. So they added extra RAM to the motherboard, and they had to disable a number of other features to be able to switch to it. So it didn't allow for any additional colors, but made for slightly better graphics quality, and it made it obviously compatible for PAL video signals. However, what they had to do was to build their own version of the Auto Start ROM. So they've got the PALSoft ROM, and to replace AppleSoft, I should say. And the result was that if you used NTSC color applications on your ITT, you'd often get those extra bits show up as black. So you'd get these lines down the screen, which were the empty bits that the NTSC color couldn't afford, and PAL color took care of. Now, there was a third-party adapter, I believe, that fixed that. I've never seen one, and my machine doesn't have one. So like I said, they adjusted the ROM, and as a result, they recompiled the code with the extra data. And so if you had an AppleSoft program that called directly into the AppleSoft code, rather than just using a command, so peeks and pokes and so forth, they would often fail in the ITT because the ROMs were different and the coding was different. And so your peeks and pokes into the AppleSoft or the PALSoft ROM don't work. Now, the other issue was the disk drives didn't work at this 50 hertz frequency. So ITT ended up building their own version of the floppy drive. I don't have one, sadly. Almost got one on eBay from the UK, but someone swooped in and bought it from under me. Still having issues with that. However, they had to build their own disk drive. Now, it wasn't based on the shoe guards that we're used to with the Disk 2. It was a different mechanism altogether, I guess ultimately compatible with 50 hertz. And they also made their own Disk 2 interface card that allowed for the 50 hertz and the different frequency and timing of their drive. Now, this card was a 13 sector card. Now, if you go back and we talk about storage devices in a previous episode, you'll know that Apple started off with 13 sectors. ITT adopted the 13 sectors with their own card. However, when Apple upgraded to 16 sectors, the P5 and P6 ROMs on the interface card that did that weren't compatible with the ITT card's timing. So the ITT drives and system was stuck at 13 sectors and couldn't avail themselves of the extra storage space that 16 sectors in the Apple II would allow. Now, as you can see, ITT had a different case. In fact, they started off with a silver version of the Apple II case and a whole range of different keyboards. If you check online, just about every system looks a bit different. But then they moved to this silver matte case. Now mine's a bit bashed up because, gee, they're rare. If you have a look online right at the moment, there's a couple available in Europe for multiple thousands of dollars. And I couldn't afford multiple thousands of dollars, so I got the one that I could afford. And the result is it's bashed up a little bit around the edges. Nevertheless, I have an ITT 2020 in Australia. They also had different keyboards. Now this one is a Datanetics keyboard, and you can tell again because of the power light, and when you take the case off, you can see the single sheet circuit board for the keyboard. So the ITT came again in a variety of standards. Now they built their own motherboards, they built their own PCBs, everything they built themselves. An interesting machine, and I'm still doing some work on this to get it up and running. So this was 1979, and going back again, it was made by ITT specifically to address the issue in the European market where the Apple II and the Apple II Plus couldn't do colour and couldn't handle the 220 volts. So clearly all of these machines were international. The Apple II and II Plus were largely in the US, not in Australia because they're 110 volts. So the only way you'd find one in Australia is someone had imported it and then made their own arrangements to change the circuitry to make it work. So I've imported these. The ITT was only released in Europe, not just in England, but across Europe. And that's where I sourced this one. But in 1979, so the same year that the ITT 2020 was actually released, remember they've been working on it for quite some time with all those changes, Apple released the Apple II Euro Plus. Now this is the machine, this is the first computer that I purchased. So this is from the episode a couple of weeks ago. So the Apple II Euro Plus. Now, it supported 220 to 240 volts at 50 hertz. It had some motherboard changes to support PAL. You still needed an interface card to actually do the PAL video signal, but the motherboard was reconfigured for the appropriate timing and so forth to support PAL. And again, he had a bit of a trick to encode the NTSC signal back into a pure signal and then back out into PAL, whereas ITT did it a completely different way. Now, Apple produced one of these PAL cards, but they were quite expensive. So mostly third-party cards. And in fact, if you recall, I got mine from DigiCard, again, just around the corner in Eltham. So there were lots of Australian modifications available for the Euro Plus. And this Euro Plus, of course, I bought right here in Melbourne. All right. Now, one other thing I found out about the Euro Plus, there are actually multiple versions of the Auto Start ROM for the Euro Plus, and that was to account for the various languages across Europe. Now, you couldn't address the special characters for the European alphabets with the extra inflections and dots and so forth, but there was a escape key sequences. So you'd hit escape and a few other keys to get those particular characters on screen or in print. Needless to say, mine's an Australian version, so it's basically the English version. All right. The following year, now depending which year, which documentation you're following, most say that in 1980, so a year after the Euro Plus, Apple released the J Plus to go to the Japanese market, who were also very much into technology. And so in July 1980, the Apple II J Plus for the Japanese market was released. Now, interesting thing about the power supply. So whilst they're very similar to the US, Japan apparently used 100 volts, but depending which side of the country you're on, you are either using 50 hertz or 60 hertz. Now, I didn't know this until I was reading up on the documentation, so sorry to my Japanese colleagues that I didn't know. But they had two versions for east and west of Japan. I'm actually not sure which one I've got. I should probably check. I can't quickly read it, but it's got an STEC power supply. So power supply changes. It is an NTSC machine because Japan uses NTSC. So the color's okay. But of course, the Japanese characters are different to plain English. Now, the Apple II wasn't powerful enough to do kanji script, but it did do the katana characters. Now, I'm not familiar with those, so again, forgive me. But it did allow you to use the katana characters that allowed you to do some scripting that fit in with the Japanese language. However, from one of the websites, I think it was the wiki, in order to access this, you needed to type in the command poke -16292,0 to turn this feature on. Then you could use Control T to swap between katana and English, and then to turn it off, you needed to type in poke -16291,0. So not exactly user-friendly, if you ask me. Now, this was if you were just typing into the computer's prompt. If you are programming in AppleSoft Basic, you needed some additional tricks to print. You could do the pokes, but to print the Control T, you needed to do some other tricks, which I won't go into now. But let's face it to say, it was not a simple thing to use an Apple II J Plus with the katana characters. But if you have a look at the keyboard, I'll put up a close-up, you can see the katana characters actually on the keys there as well. And of course, the ROM in this one is a different version of the Auto Start ROM as well. All right. Then, back in 1979, we've got our second official Apple clone, and that's the Bell & Howell Apple II computer, often called the Darth Vader computer because it was their first, and for a long time only, black Apple, certainly the only black Apple II. So it came in both varieties, Apple II and an Apple II Plus variety. So they did license both. These are both II Plus versions. They came with matching black disk drives, and I thought I'd get these out to show you. I'll do a close-up in a moment. All of these computers were manufactured by Apple on behalf of Bell & Howell. And in fact, it even says made exclusively for Bell & Howell by Apple Computer on each of them. Whereas the ITT 2020 just says that it's an Apple system. All right. So we had the matching disk drives. I mentioned that it was manufactured by Apple. So this early version is a standard Apple II, and there's nothing special on the inside or the outside. But they did make this version here with a backpack, and I'll do a close-up photo, but you can see, hopefully from this height, that there's a backpack. The other major modification is it came with an enormous power cord, because of course it was made for schools. So this later backpack, on one side, it had the power pack, which allows you to plug in three 110 volt power cords. So one inlet and two outlets, and it's got separate switches for each. So you could turn the computer and the monitor on separately in the school. Makes sense. There's also an externally accessible fuse, which made servicing easier for the schools, because these were really made for schools and linked in with the Bell & Howell audio-visual and film systems and so forth, slide projectors and so forth in the day. On the other side, on the left-hand side, there's an audio system. And so this has got a really simple mixing system for two inputs and also the internal sound. It comes with coaxial video out, and it also comes with the cassette ports on the back, which would be for data. Now, because the backpack blocks the internals, and in fact these were screwed down for the schools, on the side here, on the right hand side as you're facing the Apple II, they've got external 7 pinned in game controller ports. Now, I've never seen what plugs into them. Some people may have seen them, let me know. But anyway, that's the black Apple II. There's also a big handle on the back of it so that you can lug it around the school. I'm not going to do that because, well, gee, they're rare these days, and I don't want to damage it. Now, Bell & Howell later marketed a beige version of this backpack separately for Apple IIes in school. So rather than having the whole computer, you just buy the backpack, plug it in. Oh, and the other variation in the backpack version, on the inside, there's a shift key mod that I've talked about before. I did it manually to my Apple II Euro Plus, but it basically connects one of the game paddle ports to the keyboard so that you can get upper and lower case with a shift key. Now, there was one more official Apple clone that I have seen photos of, but I've never seen in the flesh or in the plastic because they are just so rare. So I'm going to have to share photos of this one, and you'll see the attributions in the photos. So there's much less information known about this, but one former employee of the company involved has got quite a story on the website. I'll put the links down in the description. So what is this machine? It's the Clearlight Superstar. It appears that it was available from about 1981, certainly from 1982, according to the stories online. But it was an official Apple II clone, and it looks like it was manufactured by Apple because the nameplates and so forth are very reminiscent of the Bell & Howell nameplates, except it says Clearlight Superstar. Now, these appear to have been manufactured in grey. I don't think it's silver. From the photos that I've seen, I think it's in a grey colour. Now, they have a black keyboard like the Darth Vader version. And they also had a matching disc 2 as well. Now, it was grey on the outside with a black face, very reminiscent of the Bell & Howell disk drives that I've got here. Now, it's unclear, but appears to be an Apple II Plus style keyboard because it's got the lowered power switch or power light. So I think it's based on the Apple II Plus. And these came with the Clearlight Star Universal interface. And so what Clearlight were about, they were an audio-visual company that made slideshow presentations with up to 15 projectors at times, possibly more. And so they would sync a soundtrack to a slide presentation and do dissolves between multiple slides. And in fact, in the description that one of their employees has put online, it looks like they could even run pseudo movies using slides because they could get up to 100 slides changing, per minute. That's pretty fast. What a system. The universal interface looks to have been an audio-visual controller for slideshows with multiple projectors synced to a soundtrack. And it also, from reading, it also looks like the computer was actually used to program the sequence, but you didn't need the computer necessarily to play it back. Once it had been programmed and put into the universal interface, I believe the interface itself could do the playback, which would make it easier if you're moving around. You didn't have to take the computer with you to the site. You just needed to take the interface and the audio-visual equipment. Isn't that amazing? All right. So, do you have any of these official, original Apple IIs in your collection? Do you have the rare Clearlight Superstar? I would love to see one if there's one in Australia. Which one's your favourite? Do you still use it? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. On to this week's news. And first up, user K at the Facebook Apple Macintosh Enthusiast group has announced MacBong is now available. Now I see that Brankus Creations has done a review. I think he even built one in the review. But the Mac Bong is now available for purchase complete. Now, Mac Bong, what is it? It's a switch to turn your classic Mac on or off, but it's also now merged with an adapter to use a USB keyboard, mouse, or other device on your classic Mac. So you can use a USB keyboard in place of your RJ11 keyboard for your original Mac, or your DB9 mouse, or Apple desktop bus mouse or keyboard. So sounds like a great thing to have. Links down in the description. Also on the Facebook Apple Macintosh enthusiast group, user Eric has announced that he's developing a new microkernel for 68K and PowerPC Macs. Now, the microkernel is the bit underneath everything that actually runs the operating system. Now, it's very early days, but the intent is to solve the 2040 date bomb, which, to be honest, I wasn't aware of. But apparently, those early system 6, 7, and 8 operating systems won't go past 2040. Who knew? But in addition to that, he's also looking to put in limited preemptive multitasking, which will be fantastic, and memory protection so that the applications you run won't crash each other. So we're used to all of these things in OS X, but here you go. Eric's microkernel, when he gets it finished, will provide that to system 6, 7, 8, and 9. That'll be fantastic. Now, he says that he might need to use a Kickstarter to continue. Now, you've got to remember, though, that Apple tried this and failed. And that's why Apple ended up purchasing Next and using Next Step to turn into OS X as a result. So what Eric is trying here is a huge undertaking. So if you're interested in this, it might be worth supporting his Kickstarter. Anyway, have a look at what he's posted, link down in the description. On to coming events. Now, Technology Markets held their last event last Sunday, and apparently it included a retro computing event. However, there are no new dates as yet, so check their Facebook page for updates when they come through. The Adelaide Retro Computing Group have their next meeting on Friday, the 14th of August, from 5:30 till 10:30 at the Unley Community Centre in South Australia. The Mac Museum held their last open day last Saturday. It was fantastic. Highly recommend. The next one is on Saturday, the 8th of August, from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. Note that there's a new membership scheme and check the website for details. Of course, the Mac Museum is in Somerville, Victoria. Retro Gaming Bendigo are holding their next event on Saturday, the 1st of August, from 12 for a 12:30 start in the Huntley Memorial Hall near Bendigo in Victoria. And last up this week was Fest. The next meeting is on the 25th of July, again held in a private home, and also I believe online. Contact the organisers for further information, link down in the description. And if you have a retro computing event, particularly one involving Apple computers, please reach out and let me know. I'd be happy to include it in our list here on the podcast. Okay, on to this week's for sale section. So I was looking for Apple II things in Australia. There are a few, and some of them are a bit expensive, but I do have a couple of cheap things for those of you on a budget. All right, first up, on Gumtree, a boxed Apple II Euro Plus with disk drive, a Sanyo screen, and some extras. This one's in South Australia for $1,476. Now I notice this has been listed since December 2024 and it's quite a big price. However, if you want all of these things in box, it's available. Not sure whether it's working, maybe contact the seller. Next up, we have an Apple IIe, which comes with two 2.25-inch Unidisc drives, Apple joystick, and an Epson printer. Again, not clear whether it's working or not, but this is a complete system. It's a 2E system, so it's a bit newer than the ones I've been talking about today. And this one's available for $2,000 in Victoria. Next up, there's a vintage Apple computer collection. Now, there's no prices for this. The seller is looking for expressions of interest, but it does include an Apple IIe, an Apple IIc, an Apple IIgs, a Macintosh SE, a Macintosh LC, and a Macintosh LC575, and they're all working in the photographs. So if you're interested in any or all of these, contact the seller and put in your expression of interest. Next up, I've been watching this for a while, but now that I've got one, there's an Apple II Red Book reference manual for the original Apple II available from Queensland for $165.50, or at least that's what my eBay account says. Now, for the budget conscious, this Apple II reference manual with about 195 pages, not in perfect condition, but complete. I got one of these with my Apple II Euro Plus, so this is a 1980s version, available for you in Victoria for $65. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 48 and the look at the range of official Apple II computers. Next week, maybe we'll have a look at the Apple IIe line, because we've got a few of those here as well. Please let me know what you thought of this episode and the ideas about future episodes down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And until I see you next time, take care. Thank you for joining the Macdownunder Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.